Well, welcome to January. It's not raining, so we'll start outside. I have taken this video and recorded it at least, oh, I don't know, 35, 40 times. I even had most of it almost done, except for the fact I realized that, well, let's be fair, wiring is boring. There's just no way around it. And if somebody got into this hobby to say, man, I really like the wiring, that's a crazy individual. Because I'll be honest with you, I think if you took a survey, most model railroaders would look at you and say, I don't like wiring. Now, to be fair, when I was wiring small and medium-sized layouts and doing that, when I was learning how to do the hobby or just simply didn't have the room because of my living conditions and I had no room but a small shelf or something like that, wiring wasn't that big of a deal. A couple wires here and there, and I didn't need sensors, didn't need any of the fancy stuff because, quite frankly, I could see one end to the layout to the other. Wasn't a big deal. But here on the Colorado Front Range, it's a much bigger deal. I got a dispatcher sitting at a desk, and I have over 400 feet of main line. Excuse me, 300 feet of main line. 300 feet, please, let's not make it bigger than it is. 300 feet of main line. The dispatcher has no way of knowing where the train is at. And with the serpentine build of it, he couldn't see it from one side to the other, even if he did stand up and take a look. So you need those sensors. The other thing is that helps in operations. When you have 3 and 4 trains running and a dispatcher trying to figure out where to put trains, you need sensors. Now, you don't need them everywhere. You definitely need them on the main lines and maybe some of the main entrances coming in and out of the yards. But for the most part, you really only need it on the main line. That being said, I also need them in my staging yard, which is not a small task. I'll be fair with you. My staging yard is over 55 feet long. Yes, 8 tracks over 55 feet long. Yeah, I'm crazy. But it allows me to stack trains back to back, which means I have to have some way to inform the dispatcher where a train is at. And I do it by videos, sensors. Those two methods seem to really work out pretty well. But nonetheless, after starting this video and running and looking at it and editing it, I came to the same conclusion I had when I started it. Wiring is boring. So I'm not really going to go into too much of the wiring. Oh, I'm going to show you the power districts, just kind of give you an idea of what you can do, and maybe some tips on wiring and making sure that you organize it enough. Maybe a little bit on, hey, you need to take some notes. I'll be fair, I've got 5 pages of typed notes. But other than that, I mean, it's wiring. But I did have a couple questions that came up over the last couple weeks, because while I've been doing the wiring, I've also been dabbling in, oh, I got a 3D printer and my laser. So somebody asked me, hey, what is better, 3D printing or laser? So we're going to kind of look a little bit into that. Not much, but I hope this not to be much more than a couple-minute long video. What am I saying? It's me. Probably going to be 25 minutes. But nonetheless, come on in and we'll show you what's going on. Oh, and we do want to show you the new JMRI panel with the sensors working. Come on. Okay, so here's a part of the layout I never thought I would film, but hey, we're filming it. This is the second power district. I have 3 power districts on this layout. I get a question every once in a while, you know, what DCC system do I use? And I've done a couple videos in the past about it, but I'll just rattle it off so that everybody understands what's going on. If you saw my video on DCC leg on large layouts, it is an issue for large layouts because we are dealing with running 15, 16, 17 locomotives, and that can really clog up the lines. So I got kind of a Frankenstein system. First of all, I have 2 DCC systems. My first one, which runs just the tracks, that's all it does. It only runs throttles and tracks. It also receives the data from these sensors. Now, to be fair, One of the issues I pointed out in DCC leg is that if we put everything on the track bus lines, you really clog it up. Well, these sensors are putting it on the throttle bus line, which we don't have a problem with leg on that throttle bus line because you probably only have 4 or 5 throttles running at a time. So, and these going on there is not that much more data. And to be fair, you're not constantly sending data from your throttle into the command center, because you can unplug your throttle and move somewhere else and it just keeps running. So you can see you're not really running into a data problem. But on the track bus line, that can be an issue. So my NCE system runs just the tracks. That's all it does. It just runs tracks. And JMRI is fully aware of that. If you've got a throttle and you're sending it through the NCE system and sending it out. Now, my second system is a Digitrack system. I like LocalNet. I like the advantages I get from it. So I have a Zephyr and a PR3 that runs turnouts, servos, relays, lighting. It'll be running the signal system. So it's running everything that you would need to control the layout. That removes that data off of those bus lines and puts it onto the LocalNet. Now the advantage of that is, quite frankly, is if a light doesn't change right away, that's not the end of the world. It's not preventing anything. But if you can't blow your horn, it's a little frustrating. So just kind of what I'm dealing with. Also, for my boosters, I have a booster in each of my power districts, and I have 10 amp boosters. Now, you're like, wow, you don't really need 10 amps. You're right, you don't. But at the time when EasyDCC was selling them, I had a large layout, not as big as this one, but I had a larger layout, and I was using the DCC signal to power everything, which is where I ran into my first leg problem. So I ended up buying a second one because I liked it so much. It's been really reliable, and I was really disappointed when I went to go buy a third one. EasyDCC went away with their new system, and so my third power district has a 7.5 amp. Now again, that's way too much, and frankly, if I was running that to the track, I'm endangering my locomotives and having them burn up because of a short. So I have circuit breakers for each of my sub-districts, and those are set for 2.5 amps, so no danger there, and that works pretty well. So again, tips for wiring. Tip number 1, take notes. I can't express this enough. It takes very little. I've got little diagrams here, drawings, just simple things like, you know, which wires, what sensors, where do these wires go to, those type of notes, just so I know what's going on. And again, I don't know if I shared this or not yet, but you know, there's between 3,500 and 4,000 feet of wire underneath this layout, and that includes everything from 2 runs of LocalNet, because I use RR Circuits version of LocalNet, which is a 3-wire serial, and then the 6-wire that I run that's the standard LocalNet. And I like them. It gives me flexibility. So I have that running twice around a 400 foot lane, or 300 foot main line. So that's right there, 600 feet. Oh, by the way, the 3-wire is just that. It's 3 wires times that. So, you know, it begins to add up. You can see over here my phone company. I have phone lines. There's a phone sitting back over there. So when you begin to add all the wires up that go into this, each of my power districts has its own 12-volt power supply, and it's fused and ready to go, so that when I wire up something to a town or something like that, or a signal, I don't have all 10 amps of 12 volts going into it. I have only, I think these are set at about 2.5 amps, maybe 2 amps. I don't remember, but doesn't matter. They're nowhere near 10, and that runs an awful lot of stuff. So that being said, the other tip I would give you is be organized. Number 1 thing, invest in one of these. you know, to be able to label anything under the sun and keep track of it. You can see I have labels, you know, even on the circuit breakers, underneath in the track, especially where the two districts come together. There's some overlapping of some of the wire, and I didn't get the colors. So let's go back to just a step on that. When you're labeling, before you can label, one of the things I really did is, and I'll show you a photograph here. I've got I've made a small investment in wiring companies, and if any of you are buying wire, I really appreciate it, because, you know, my stock is just going to be great. And you can see I am investing in it too, but I color coordinate all my wires. And those wires being color coordinated help me, so that when I look under here, for instance, if I see a black and red wire tied together back up in here, I happen to know that that's 12 volts. I don't even have to go to my notes. I know that's 12 volts. If I have a white and a color wire tied together, that's a bus line. And the bus lines are color coordinated within the districts themselves, so I can keep track of it. Now, like I said, sometimes they do overlap in some areas, and that's where the labeling machine comes in, because I can simply put on there booster 1, booster 3, booster 2, whatever it is. It's really important in Denver, because literally the 3rd district is right over top, or is right underneath the first district. And so it does help a little bit in keeping track of where the wires are at. So those are my tips on wiring. The other thing I'll give is, I have small guests coming to visit, and I don't want them, you know, messing around with all this wiring. So I cut an acrylic sheet that goes over top of it. It stands off of it. There's openings on the bottom and openings on the top. But for the most part, they can't get to the wiring. And just a little protection. It's not that bad. It's worth it to me, and it still makes it look pretty nice. And the other thing I would suggest for a tip when doing any of this type, spend some time to organize it. I actually drew mine out. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I measured all my stuff together, drew it out, and I drew it out on a CAD program, and then I took and shot it. This is a piece of MDF, and I just shot the laser cuts into everything, including the holes and all, into there, so I could, you know, have it organized. And I didn't have to guess. I actually had outlines for all of the parts that are on there, so I can simply just stick them on there and screw them into place, put their standoffs on there and everything. Made it a piece of cake, and keeps it nice and organized. This is small. The second power district is pretty small. 2 reasons is, first of all, Loveland is not even built yet. That's being used as a workbench, so there's no tracks over there. It is wired up. There is one sensor on that, because that sensor, the Loveland sub-district, is also the ladder for the beginning of the staging yard. So that sensor is up and running, and it is running that. But the rest of Loveland and the sugar mill over in Loveland are not even built. No tracks laid or anything whatsoever. The rest of these are built, and there are wires into it. We'll take a quick jump over to the first power district, just so you can take a look at it before we go into JMRI and what does this all accomplish. But you'll see that one's much more complicated. There are 13 sensors into there, and a lot of sub-districts. There's 8 of them. So let's take a jump over there and just give you a picture of that. Now, the cover's not on it yet. My laser tube burnt out, and I just got the new one, and so I should have that this cover lasered up in, well, when I get this video done, I'll start on that. So until then, let's take a move over to the first power district. Okay, so here we are at the first power district. As I said, it's much more busier, mainly because we have all these circuit breakers in here, and we have all the actually, there's 13 sensors in this area here. Not much different than the other one. Again, the advantage of pre-designing it is that you kind of can create a standard. Now, this one is obviously, like I said, more busier. The third district is even worse, because I needed to have relays to control power to all 16 sections of my staging track. But there are some similarities between all 3 of them. They all have a power meter, kind of nice just to be able to take a look at what's going on. It helps a little bit in troubleshooting. And then it has regulated power for these sensors and for the AUI board from NCE. I had looked at other things. If you look at my videos on sensors, I had originally planned on doing Arduinos. I struggled with it. I'm not a programmer, I'll be the first to admit it. This made it much more easier, and after screwing around with it for 3 months, I finally said, screw it. I want to get back to building a layout, not spend my time redoing this. And if people have that talent, man, fantastic. It really is. The Arduinos and all that are really cool, and you can really do a lot with them. Now, I'm still going to be using my Arduinos. I'm actually using them to do some other things, lighting it within the towns and things like that. So they're not going to waste from me. I still will use one of them in sensors. I'm able to manage to get one of them to function the way I want it to, and I will be using it. It's in my staging yard. But for the most part, I'm going to be simply just going with this method here. You can see one of the phones right here. That's, we talked about wiring, and that there's more wires than I know what to do with. And eventually this area in here will have curtains coming down here, so you won't see back into here. But that's kind of what I've got for the layout and the wiring. Those are my tips. So let's take a look at what this all does, because really the whole purpose of this was to get to operations and to see on the JMRI panel what sensors would allow me to do. So we're going to take a quick jump and take some photos of some videoing of the new panels that are in there, what the sensors will do, and then we're going to get into the laser and the 3D printer. So here we go. Okay, so that shows you how JMRI works and how the sensors work, and it works all the way through it. It's fantastic. The goal when I was setting that up, when I was putting my sensors in, was to have one car with resistors be able to trip the sensor. It does that probably, 65 to 85% of the time, depending on which sensor it is. There is some variables between them. 2 cars, I get pretty much 95% of the car. 3 cars, not a problem at all. And of course, locomotive's not a problem. So occasionally you may have saw a flicker on the video. Hey, acts kind of like a real one. Don't have a problem with it. I thought it was fantastic, and it will make my dispatcher's job much more easier to be able to see where the sensors are at and where trains are at. Well, not where the sensors are at, but see where the trains are at on the layout. So that brings us back to the very last subject for this update, and that is lasers versus 3D printers. And I don't really think it's a versus. Which one would I get first? Well, obviously I got the laser first. And the reason I got the laser first is, well, I know 2D CAD, so I didn't have to learn that. Yes, I bought a Chinese cheap one and then built my own, mainly because the Chinese cheap one wasn't big enough to do the modeling I wanted to do. But, you know, you could, if that works for you, that's fine. There's no problem with that. So I got the laser first. I really like my laser, and I use my laser for a lot of things, even outside of model railroading. Although I'll be fair, I do the model railroading the most, but I still have folks like John's wife who comes to me and says, hey Mike, can you cut out these patterns for feet out of MDF so I can knit some socks? And it took me no time at all, and it was really kind of easy to do. A simple evening project, and I cut out 4 different patterns for it. It was really not that tough. So I found uses for the laser outside of model railroading. As you saw with the power districts, by taking the MDF board and mapping everything out, I could actually set it down, paint it all up, add all the pieces. It made that project that much more simpler. So to be fair, do I use the laser more than my 3D printer right now? Yeah, but that's because of skill level. Just some things that I want to at least address if you're not familiar with a laser. If you are, then, you know, skip this and go on your merry way. But this is my laser, or at least the laser tube. This is a 60-watt tube. This one just recently burnt out. These do burn out like light bulbs. I was originally considering I was going to go to an 80-watt, but kind of working with it a little bit, I discovered that as I get a larger laser, the lower end power kind of drops off, and that has to do with this. You can see that's a much longer tube. A 40-watt tube is about half of that length, maybe a little more than half, and so it takes more energy to ignite the laser. And that being said, that means that the bottom end kind of drops off. So if you want to work in cardstock or something like that, actually the 40-watt tube works really good for working with cardstock and things like that, because the bottom end is much more easier than it is with the top end. But because I work mostly with MDF, basswood, plywood, and things like that, I really find that the 60-watt is more than adequate to do what I want to get done, and I have no problems with it. Working with the cardstock, you know, I do a lot of mock-ups ahead of time. I can cut it pretty well, but with the 40-watt, I could actually etch instructions or things that I was thinking about on it much more easier with the 40-watt tube than I could with the 80-watt tube or the 60-watt tube. Not to say that I can't do that. It is possible, but it's just the lower end is pushed up higher, and so you don't have as much low power energy to use and for a trade of high power energy. So to be fair, when I'm cutting through 5 and 7, 8, 9 millimeter MDF or acrylic, it's much more easier to do it with a 60-watt tube, and I'll never be able to do it with a 40. So, you know, little heads up and going. And those lasers, like I said, this one lasts me 18 months. They're not inexpensive. Just take a look at what you're looking at. And, you know, this one is a Chinese one that I bought. There are good companies out there, fantastic. And so, you know, take it for what it's worth. 3D printing. I got an Ender 3. I got it for less than $200. I'm going to show it here. a photograph of mine. I like it. The 3D printer is fantastic, and I can definitely see where it's going to fit into my modeling. Challenge is I'm not very good at 3D CADs, and I've been learning how. And so the first things I actually built were these standoffs, a real simple project. These are nothing more than simple circles that are used to screw my electronics in so they don't touch metal parts on the bottom and have some airspace in between them. Really easy to do, but you know, it was a nice simple project in CAD. I find that building tools with the extruder, and that's where I want to get to, is I have an extruder 3D printer. It is not the printer that I want to buy. It is the printer I'm going to learn to work with, but I'm finding uses in modeling as well. I needed to learn how to draw in 3D CAD. And to do that, I needed to not only draw it, but then make it and see how it turned out. A roll of PLA is about 20 bucks. And I can get, well, a lot of projects out of that. Mistakes and all, and not feel too bad, because some of these projects, like these, all these little standoffs, these probably cost me a whole dime of PLA. That's it, and just some time. But I have been doing some different things with modeling. So here is my attempt at modeling people. And you can see this is a S scale. This is HO scale. I will say this. This HO scale person, if they were back a couple, 18, 19, 20 inches off of the layout front, this would probably be an acceptable person. If you're going to have it right up close to the front edge, it's really rough, and I wouldn't do that. The S scale, though, is probably as good as many of the injected molded people. It's not bad at all. There's enough detail on the suit and things to make it worthwhile. But it's still not the best. And what I really want to get in a 3D printer is an SLA printer. And I'm not going to try and pronounce the word, because stereolithographic apparatus is just beyond my capability, and I'm sure I slaughtered that terribly, but I'll put it up above. It uses resin and a laser, and it's much more finer, and you can get it you can get your layers in microns, and to be fair, you can't even see the layers that are in it when the printing is done. That is a little more expensive printing. A resin bottle, I think I looked online last, is about $40, $45, and it expires. It's sensitive to UV light. There's a lot more involved in it. You got to. There's a little bit of risk to yourself. You can become sensitized to that resin, and so learning on the ejected printer, the extruded printer, is much more easier to learn. And I've began to do things. I've worked with some models. I built an air conditioning unit for a couple of my buildings. I built some piping and some vents. Works really well for that kind of stuff, where scale is not nearly as critical. You know, if it's 18 inches or 16 inches, nobody's going to notice any difference in a vent, and who cares? All you notice is there's a vent there, and you go on your merry way. So it works really well for that. I've been making little tools and little things with it, that I can practice my 3D drawing skills, and learning how to print. I mean, printing is a skill itself. So if someone was to say to me, which is better, I would look at them and say, well, for me personally, the laser is better because I can use it much more quickly and much more readily, but that's a skill situation rather than which is better. I am really looking forward to being able to do 3D printing of people, of detail parts. That's what I really see this going in the 3D printing going. Detail parts are starting to disappear. And if I can do them in 3D printing, I'm ahead of the game and I'll be able to get the detail parts I want. The other thing that I really look at this for using is, skip my mind, just totally blew it. Oh well, don't worry about it, it's not that important. What I will say though is if somebody's looking for a ma and pop cottage industry in this hobby, I have a couple suggestions, and I think this is really something that if somebody's interested in, they have to be good with CAD. There are lots and lots of people buying lasers and 3D printers. And they're sitting on the shelf, and they're people that bought them with no skill in CAD whatsoever, or little skill, and just can't seem to find the time. If you're skilled in that type of stuff, and you build yourself a library of 3D printing and laser cuts that you can do on a laser or a 3D printer and sell the plans, I'm telling you, you might have yourself a business. Don't know. And I'll be fair with you. I built my Colorado saddle company, and I'm pretty good with the 2D CAD, and to build the building, rough it out, took me about 4 hours and about another 12 more hours of adding details and things like that. But I got it done in about 16 hours. You know what? If somebody had that drawing already and I could just take it and cut it out, I probably would have done it, because that's 16 more hours I could have spent building on my model railroad. Just saying, those are some suggestions I have. In any case, that's my thoughts on 3D printing versus laser. I'm looking forward to using both of them. I've actually got another tool that I'm looking at. I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm looking at another one that might be handy for me around the layout here, but we'll see what happens. Until next time, though, happy modeling.